The train pulled into Larkspur Flats 3 hours past its scheduled time, wheels groaning against iron rails as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small wooden station. Red dust swirled up from the platform like a tattered blanket, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that seemed to seep into the very soul of this frontier town. Eleanor Roosevelt stepped down from the passenger car, her traveling trunk heavy in her arms, the wedding dress folded carefully inside. In her other hand, she clutched a bundle of letters tied with hemp string promises of a new life that now felt as fragile as autumn leaves. The station master had delivered the news with the casual indifference of a man who'd seen too much heartbreak her intended. Benjamin Franklin had died in what they called a stable accident the week prior. The crowd gathered on the platform buzzed with whispers and pointed stares. Mrs. Whitman, who ran the boarding house, shook her head firmly when Eleanor approached about a room. "Can't take in no woman without a proper guarantor," she said. Her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. The local newspaper reporter, a weaselly man with ink-stained fingers, tipped his hat mockingly. "The bride nobody claimed," he announced loud enough for the saloon across the street to hear. Laughter erupted from within, harsh and brittle as broken glass. Theodore Roosevelt had just finished driving a herd to the water station when he stopped by the depot for horseshoe nails. The sun hung low and angry in the sky, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. That's when he saw her Eleanor, sitting on her trunk beside the railway marker, her face tilted up to catch the wind as if trying to swallow both tears and dust in equal measure. The wind picked up suddenly, fierce and unexpected. Catching the lace veil attached to Eleanor's traveling hat, she scrambled after it, her boots slipping on a patch of spilled oil. She would have fallen clear off the wooden platform if Theodore hadn't caught her wrist, both of them stumbling awkwardly until Eleanor found herself pressed against his leather vest. The moment was both mortifying and oddly comic, two strangers tangled in an impromptu dance neither had asked for. "Auction off her trunk," the saloon keeper bellowed from his doorway. "She can't pay the depot fees. Might as well get something for it." The drunk patrons spilled out onto the boardwalk, clapping and hooting like it was the evening's entertainment. Eleanor straightened her spine, a flash of steel in her gray eyes. "Any man who touches my wedding trunk will find it and himself at the bottom of the nearest well." Her voice carried across the platform with surprising authority for someone who'd been sitting in defeat moments before. Theodore reached into his vest and tossed a leather pouch onto the depot counter. The coins inside clinked heavily. "Her fees are paid," he said simply, then turned to Eleanor. "No conditions attached." She studied him for a long moment, reading something in his weathered face that made her shoulders relax fractionally. Pride warred with practicality in her expression. "I cannot accept charity, Mr. Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. And it ain't charity if you're willing to share a meal and tell me what brings a lady with medical supplies in her bag to a place like Larkspur Flats." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. He'd noticed the corner of her medical kit peeking from beneath her travel cloak. "You're observant. Helps keep a man alive out here." Word traveled fast in a town starved for gossip, before the sun had moved another hand's width across the sky. Everyone knew about Benjamin Franklin's land prime acreage near a tributary of Cottonwood Creek, perfect for a way station now that the railroad was expanding. More importantly, everyone knew Thomas Edison wanted it. The cattle baron had been circling that property like a vulture for months, as if summoned by the thought. Edison's foreman, a mean-spirited man named Carnegie, sauntered over from the saloon. His boots rang heavy on the platform boards, spurs jangling with each step. "Well, now," he drawled, tobacco juice staining the corner of his mouth. "Seems we got ourselves a situation. Poor little lady, all alone in the world. Mr. Edison might be willing to assist. Make an honest woman of you, so to speak. All legal and proper-like." Eleanor's voice could have frozen the desert. "I'd sooner take up residence with the rattlesnakes." Carnegie's hand moved toward his hip, a gesture meant to intimidate. Theodore stepped forward, not threatening, just present. Don't believe there's any law against a stranger offering a lady safe escort to a meal. The tension stretched taut as barbed wire. Theodore leaned close to Eleanor, his voice low enough that only she could hear, though his words carried the weight of frontier law. Walk with me. Tonight, you're under my protection, you're mine, in the sense that I'm taking responsibility for your safety. No one will bother you while you're with me. Eleanor met his gaze directly, searching for any hint of impropriety or demand, finding only steady sincerity. She nodded once. They left the station together, walking past the telegraph poles that hummed and sang in the wind. At the edge of town, a pack of dogs howled at the approaching dusk, and dust devils danced across the main street like spirits. The landscape stretched out before them, wild, harsh, and possessed of a terrible beauty that could break hearts as easily as bones. As they walked, Theodore pointed out the landmarks. That's Whitman's boarding house, overpriced and undercleaned. The saloon's run by Patrick Henry, mean drunk but fair when he's sober, which ain't often. The church there. He gestured to a small wooden structure that seemed to shiver in the wind. Reverend, Washington tries his best, but the roof leaks something fierce when the rains come. And your place? Eleanor asked, surprised at her own boldness. Willow Draw Ranch, about 3 miles north. Nothing fancy, just a cabin and some outbuildings. Good water, though. That's worth more than gold out here. They stopped at the small restaurant run by a German couple. The Jeffersons, Mrs. Jefferson took one look at Eleanor and bustled her to a corner table, clucking sympathetically. You eat. Yes, good stew tonight, make you strong. Over the meal, Eleanor told her story simply, without self-pity. She'd been a seamstress and apprentice nurse in Kansas City, parents gone mother to childbirth fever, father to typhoid. She'd answered Benjamin's advertisement for a mail-order bride not out of desperation, but from a desire for partnership, for land of her own, for a chance to build something lasting. Theodore listened, noting the steady way she held her spoon, the careful mending on her gloves, the way she'd unconsciously checked the exits when they'd entered. Here was a woman who'd learned to take care of herself but hadn't let it make her bitter. Not yet. Benjamin wrote about the possibilities, Eleanor said, producing one of his letters. A way station. He said, travelers need rest, horses need tending. He had such plans. Her voice trailed off. Plans don't always survive first contact with the frontier, Theodore said gently. But that doesn't mean new ones can't be made. Carnegie appeared in the doorway, backlit by the saloon's glow. Edison wants to know if the ladies reconsidered his generous offer. Theodore didn't move, didn't reach for the Colt at his hip, just continued eating his stew with deliberate calm. Ladies trying to enjoy her meal in peace. This ain't over, Carnegie growled. Rarely is, Theodore agreed mildly. After Carnegie left, Eleanor studied Theodore with those sharp gray eyes. Why are you helping me? You don't know me from Adam. Theodore considered the question, rolling it over like a river stone. Maybe because I've seen what Edison does to people who stand in his way. Maybe because this town could use someone willing to stand up to him. Or maybe, he met her gaze, because I recognize the look of someone who's got steel in their spine but could use a friend while they figure out their next move. Eleanor's smile was small but genuine, the first he'd seen from her. Friends, then, for now. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Jefferson pressed a small bundle into Eleanor's hands. Bread for morning, she whispered. You come back any time. Yes. Outside, the stars had begun their nightly show, scattered across the vast canvas of sky like promises waiting to be kept. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack. Where will you stay tonight? Theodore asked. Eleanor lifted her chin. The church has a hay storage. Reverend Washington said I could bed down there for a few nights while I sort out Benjamin's affairs. Theodore nodded, respecting her choice even as something in his chest tightened at the thought of her sleeping in a drafty barn. "I'll walk you there. And Eleanor." He used her given name for the first time. "Lock the door. Carnegie's not the type to give up easy, and Edison's got a long reach." As they walked through the dusty streets, Eleanor found herself oddly comforted by the solid presence beside her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers to see, claims to file, battles to fight. But tonight, she wasn't entirely alone in this harsh, unforgiving land. And sometimes, in the wild territories of the heart, that was enough to begin. The morning sun crept over the eastern hills, painting Larkspur Flats in shades of gold and shadow. Eleanor emerged from the church's hay storage, brushing straw from her traveling dress. She'd slept little, her mind churning over the reality of her situation. In her worn leather satchel, she carried her most precious possessions, a sewing kit passed down from her mother, basic medical supplies she'd gathered during her apprenticeship, and a battered copy of Thoreau's Walden with a cracked spine. She'd grown up in Kansas City, daughter of a tailor and a midwife. Her mother had died when Eleanor was 12, succumbing to childbed fever after delivering a stillborn son. Her father, broken by grief, had tried to carry on, but typhoid took him 3 winters later. At 19, Eleanor had found herself alone, skilled with a needle and thread, possessing basic medical knowledge, but without family or prospects. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like providence. Benjamin Franklin's letters spoke of practicality rather than romance. He needed a partner, someone strong enough for frontier life. She'd appreciated his honesty. Now, standing in the dusty street of Larkspur Flats, she wondered if she'd traded one form of uncertainty for another. Theodore Roosevelt's ranch sat 3 miles north of town, where the land rolled into gentle swells dotted with juniper and pine. The main house was simple, but solid logs chinked tight against the wind, a stone chimney that drew properly, and a wide porch where saddles and tack hung in orderly rows. He'd built it himself after the cattle wars of '92, choosing isolation over the complicated politics of town life. Theodore carried his own ghosts, the son of Scottish immigrants who'd raised cattle in the Nebraska Territory. He'd learned the business from the ground up. During the chaos of 1892, he'd ridden with a vigilante group targeting suspected rustlers. One night, they'd cornered the wrong man, a young homesteader barely out of his teens. Theodore had hesitated, arriving a crucial minute too late to stop the hanging. The boy's face haunted him still. The scar on his right shoulder served as a permanent reminder. He'd gotten it trying to cut the boy down, fighting his own companions when they tried to stop him. These days, he worked alone, ran a small but profitable operation, and kept his interactions with town to a minimum. He slept little, often sitting on his porch listening to the prairie wind, wondering if redemption was possible for men who'd let violence make their choices. Larkspur Flats itself was typical of railroad towns springing up across Wyoming. Main Street consisted of the saloon doubling as a barber shop, a blacksmith, a small law office, the post office, and a general store. The church, built from donated lumber, creaked and groaned in strong winds. The railroad track cut through the valley like a silver scar, bringing progress and problems in equal measure. Thomas Edison ruled the valley's cattle interests with a combination of legal maneuvering and strategic intimidation. He wore black wool coats even in summer, a ruby ring on his pinky finger, and spoke in a cultured Eastern accent that made his threats sound almost polite. He'd grown wealthy supplying beef to the silver mining operations, and he had a talent for acquiring land through foreclosures and contested claims. At the law office of Harriet Tubman, one of the few female attorneys in the territory, Eleanor spread out Benjamin's papers. The will was simple enough, everything to his intended bride, Eleanor Roosevelt, upon our marriage. But without the marriage, the claim grew complicated. "You'll need to prove the engagement was legitimate," Harriet explained, her sharp eyes scanning the documents. "Or prove Benjamin intended to transfer the property regardless. Edison's already filed a competing claim, saying Benjamin owed him money." That's a lie, Eleanor said flatly. Truth and law don't always share the same bed. Harriet replied, but we'll fight it. That land has the water rights Edison needs for his expansion. He won't give up easy. Eleanor made a decision. Then neither will I. She took up residence in the church's storage barn, hanging a curtain for privacy and setting up a small workspace. By day, she took in mending from the railroad workers and local families. By night, she tended injuries for the Chinese and Irish track crews who couldn't afford the town doctor. Her prices were fair, her stitches neat, and her medical knowledge, while basic was sound. Theodore kept his distance at first, respecting her independence, but he found himself riding past the church more often than necessary, leaving bundles of firewood by her door, making sure Carnegie and Edison's other men saw him watching. One evening, a dust storm rolled in from the north. The sky turned sickly green, then brown, as a wall of dirt and debris engulfed the town. Theodore found Eleanor struggling to secure the barn doors, the wind threatening to tear them from their hinges. "Inside," he shouted over the roar. They stumbled into the barn together, stuffing rags under the doors as grit pounded against the walls like hail. The world outside disappeared into a howling brown void. Eleanor lit a lamp, its glow creating a small circle of calm. A group of children from the railroad workers' camp had taken shelter with her, eyes wide with fear. Without hesitation, she gathered them close and opened her copy of Walden, reading aloud in a steady voice that cut through the storm's fury. Theodore watched her transform fear into wonder, describing Thoreau's pond so vividly the children forgot the sand beating against the walls. Her strength wasn't the kind that came from muscle and bone. It was deeper, rooted in an unshakable core that refused to bend to circumstances. When the storm passed, leaving the town coated in a fine layer of dust, Theodore helped Eleanor sweep out the barn. She found a dead sparrow by the door, its small body dried and stiff. "Even they need shelter," she murmured, gently wrapping the bird in cloth. "We all need a place to rest." The vulnerability in her voice, mixed with determination, stirred something in Theodore he'd thought buried with that young homesteader years ago. Their friendship deepened through practical exchanges. Eleanor mended Theodore's work clothes and repaired his saddles, trading for lumber and nails to shore up the barn's sagging roof. Theodore taught her to shoot his Winchester, showing her how to breathe through the wind and anticipate the kick. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked after successfully hitting a tin can at 50 yards. "Because Edison plays for keeps," he said simply. "And because you've got steady hands and a good eye, shame to waste natural talent." The market day brought the community together. Eleanor set up a small stand offering quick repairs for the railroad workers. Even Mrs. Whitman, who'd refused her lodging, snuck over to purchase a mended petticoat. Gradually, the suspicious looks softened into nods of acknowledgement, then tentative smiles. A Navajo family passing through town stopped at Eleanor's stand. Their young daughter had an infected cut on her arm. Eleanor cleaned and dressed it carefully, using the last of her good bandages. The grandmother watched with keen eyes, then showed Eleanor how to make a poultice from local plants. "For next time," she said in accented English. Theodore translated the rest. Having learned some of the language during his years on the range, they traded knowledge and respect, finding common ground in the simple act of helping. One night, as they sat by a small fire behind the church, Theodore finally spoke of his past. The words came slowly, painfully, like pulling thorns from infected wounds. He told her about the vigilante raid, the young homesteader, the minute that changed everything. Eleanor didn't offer platitudes or easy forgiveness. Instead, she added another log to the fire and said quietly, "Living with it might be the hardest punishment, but also the only chance for redemption. The dead can't change anything. The living can." Theodore studied her profile in the firelight. "You always this wise?" "No," she admitted. "Sometimes I'm just a frightened woman sleeping in a barn, wondering if I've made a terrible mistake coming here." And the rest of the time, I remember that I chose this. That has to count for something. Word reached them through Harriet that Edison had hired surveyors to map Benjamin's land. Red stakes appeared overnight, marking boundaries that included the crucial water access. The town watched nervously, understanding that this conflict would set precedents for future disputes. "He's testing you," Theodore warned, "seeing if you'll fold." Eleanor's jaw set stubbornly. Then he's about to be disappointed. The first real test came sooner than expected. Carnegie set fire to the church's hay storage while Eleanor was treating patients in town. By the time the alarm rang out, flames were already licking at the roof. Eleanor ran back to find her few possessions threatened, her makeshift home disappearing into smoke. Theodore appeared with a bucket brigade. Townspeople who'd been hesitant now fought alongside them. They passed water hand to hand while embers flew like angry stars. The wind howled, threatening to spread the fire to the church itself. Young Samuel, one of the railroad children Eleanor taught, sobbed as they fought the flames. "Miss Eleanor, will the letters burn? Will the words disappear?" Eleanor, her face streaked with soot, knelt beside him even as others shouted for more water. "No, Samuel, the letters live in your head now. Fire can't touch what's in here." She tapped his forehead gently. They saved the church but lost the storage barn. Eleanor stood among the ashes of her temporary home, her few remaining possessions blackened with smoke. Yet she didn't weep. Instead, she began planning where to rebuild, her mind already working through the practicalities. Edison himself appeared the next morning, Carnegie at his side. He wore his black coat despite the heat, that ruby ring catching the light as he gestured. "Miss Roosevelt," he said smoothly, "this unfortunate incident could have been avoided. My offer still stands, a comfortable arrangement that would benefit everyone." "Your offer," Eleanor said clearly, so the gathering crowd could hear, "is as unwelcome now as it was before. And if you think burning me out will change my mind, you understand very little about the kind of woman who chooses to come west." Edison's cultured mask slipped slightly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, young woman." Theodore stepped from the crowd to stand beside Eleanor. Not threatening, just present. "She's dealing with a man who sends others to do his dirty work. We all see it. We all know it. Question is, what are we going to do about it?" The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through them like wind through wheat. They'd lived under Edison's shadow for so long. Resistance seemed impossible. But here stood a seamstress and a quiet rancher, neither backing down. That night, Eleanor accepted Theodore's offer to stay at his ranch temporarily. She insisted. As they rode out under stars sharp as glass, she asked, "Why stand with me publicly? You've kept to yourself for years." Theodore considered his answer carefully. "Maybe because I'm tired of keeping to myself. Maybe because watching you refuse to break reminds me there are different kinds of strength." He paused. "Or maybe because it's time I chose a side worth standing on." Eleanor nodded, understanding more than he said. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the vast darkness, and the wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight she wasn't facing them alone. The West had a way of stripping people down to their essential selves. In Eleanor, it found someone who bent without breaking. In Theodore, it offered a second chance at courage. And in their growing bond, it nurtured something neither had expected: hope that redemption could bloom even in the harshest soil. The autumn sun painted Larkspur Flats in shades of amber and rust as Eleanor established her makeshift school on the church's covered porch. Without the barn, she'd had to adapt. But adaptation had become her specialty. Each afternoon, children gathered, the sons and daughters of railroad workers, ranch hands, and even some townspeople who'd warming to the unclaimed bride. She taught letters to young Abraham, whose father worked the railroad. She helped Mary and Martha, twin daughters of Chinese immigrants, learn their numbers using smooth stones from the creek. The lessons were simple but revolutionary in a frontier town where formal education was a luxury. Eleanor offered knowledge freely to anyone willing to learn. Theodore had taken to stopping by during these sessions, ostensibly to water his horse, but really to watch Eleanor work her particular magic. She had a way of making each child feel seen, transforming their struggles into victories. When young William couldn't grasp subtraction, she used horseshoe nails to demonstrate. When Sarah grew frustrated with her letters, Eleanor showed her how to trace them in the dust, making the lesson tactile and real. "You're building something here," Theodore observed one evening as they cleaned up after lessons. "Building what?" Eleanor asked, stacking the borrowed slates. "Community. Hope. Things Edison can't buy or burn." Their partnership deepened through the rhythms of frontier life. Theodore brought Eleanor to his ranch at dawn to help with calving season, the first time she assisted with a difficult birth. Her hands trembled, but her resolve held steady. Together, they guided a breech calf into the world, the mother cow lowing anxiously until her baby stood on wobbly legs. "Life finds a way," Eleanor murmured, watching the calf nurse. Her dress was ruined with mud and blood, but her smile was radiant. Even here, especially here, Theodore taught her the language of the land, how to read weather and cloud formations, track animals by their prints, find water by watching birds. In return, Eleanor mended more than his clothes. She mended the part of him that had closed off after that night of vigilante violence. Her quiet presence, her refusal to judge or coddle, created space for him to breathe again. The first dust storm of the season hit without warning. The sky turned green-brown, and the air itself became a living thing, clawing at eyes and throats. Eleanor and her students huddled in the church while the wind howled like a living thing. She kept them calm by reading from her worn copy of Walden, her voice steady despite the walls shaking around them. When young Joseph panicked, crying for his mother, Eleanor gathered him close. "Listen to my voice," she said. "We're safe here. The storm will pass, and your mother will be waiting." She taught them a game, having each child share one thing they were grateful for, turning fear into focus. Theodore arrived as the storm ebbed, leading a group of parents who'd been caught in town. The reunion was tearful and joyful. "Mrs." Chen pressed Eleanor's hands, speaking rapid Chinese that Mary translated. "She says you have the heart of a teacher and the courage of a warrior." The market days became Eleanor's opportunity to expand her influence. She set up her mending station, but also offered basic medical care. When railroad workers couldn't afford the town doctor for minor injuries, they came to her. She cleaned wounds, set simple fractures, and dispensed advice on preventing infection. One day, a group of Navajo traders passed through. Their leader, an elderly woman with silver ornaments in her hair, watched Eleanor treat a burn on a child's arm. Through gestures and broken English, she showed Eleanor how to make a salve from local plants yucca root and pinon pine resin. In exchange, Eleanor demonstrated her suturing technique on a piece of leather. "Different ways, same purpose," the woman said, her weathered hands gentle as she applied the salve. "Healing is healing." Theodore translated what he could, facilitating an exchange that transcended language. The traders left Eleanor with a small pouch of blue dye made from native plants. "For your teachings," they said, "make them beautiful." As winter approached, the conflict with Edison intensified. His men diverted water upstream, reducing flow to the smaller ranches. They cut fences, scattered cattle, and made veiled threats to anyone who did business with Eleanor. One evening, as Eleanor and Theodore sat by his fireplace planning their response, he finally spoke the full truth of his past. "I wasn't just there that night," he said, staring into the flames. "I led them to that homestead. I believed the accusations, wanted to believe them because it made our actions righteous." Eleanor remained quiet, letting him speak. His name was Daniel Morse, 19 years old, had a young wife and a baby daughter. I realized too late we had the wrong man. By then, the rope was already—" His voice broke. "You tried to stop it," Eleanor said softly. "Too little, too late. His wife, she looked at me with such—" Theodore touched the scar on his shoulder. "One of my own men gave me this when I tried to cut him down. Said I was going soft." "Going human," Eleanor corrected. "There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. "Finally," Eleanor spoke again. "That guilt you carry, it's heavy, but maybe instead of carrying it like a stone, you could carry it like a compass. Let it guide you toward better choices." Theodore looked at her with wonder. "How did you become so wise?" "I'm not wise," Eleanor admitted. "I just know what it's like to carry weight that threatens to drown you. After my parents died, I blamed myself if I'd known more medicine, if I'd worked harder, if I'd been better. But the dead don't want our guilt. They want our lives to mean something." The next morning brought news that Edison had filed an injunction claiming Eleanor was a fraud, that her engagement to Benjamin was fabricated. The hearing would be in 2 days at the county courthouse, a day's ride away. "He's trying to force your hand," Harriet Tubman explained. "Make you spend money and time you don't have. Then we'll make it count." Eleanor decided, "I'll need witnesses to the authenticity of the letters, proof of Benjamin's intentions." The community rallied in unexpected ways. Mrs. Jefferson provided a sworn statement about Benjamin's excitement over his bride's arrival. The postmaster confirmed the months of correspondence. Even Mrs. Whitman, who'd initially refused Eleanor lodging, testified that Benjamin had asked her about preparing the best room for his new wife. The night before the hearing, Edison made his final play. Carnegie and 3 hired men surrounded Eleanor as she left the church after evening lessons. "Last chance, Miss Roosevelt." Carnegie sneered. "Mr. Edison's offer expires at sunrise. After that—" He let the threat hang unfinished. Eleanor straightened her spine, though her heart hammered. "Tell Mr. Edison." "Tell him yourself." Theodore's voice came from the shadows. He stepped into the lamplight, hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. "Evening. Gentlemen, little late for social calls." Carnegie's hand twitched toward his weapon, but Theodore's reputation preceded him. Everyone knew he could draw faster than thought, that his years of self-imposed exile hadn't dulled his skills. "This ain't your concern, Roosevelt," Carnegie growled. "Miss Eleanor is my concern." Theodore said simply, "Has been since the day she arrived. Any man who has issue with that can discuss it with me, personally." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, in a land where protection meant everything. Theodore had just made a public claim, not of ownership, but of alliance. Carnegie backed down, but his parting words were ominous. "This ain't over, not by a long shot." After they left, Eleanor turned to Theodore. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." He met her eyes. "I've stood by and watched wrong happen before. Never again, not with you." Something shifted between them in that moment, subtle but profound. Eleanor reached out, her fingers briefly touching the scar on his hand. "Thank you," she said simply, but her eyes said more. That night, a Chinook wind blew in from the mountains, unseasonably warm and restless. Eleanor couldn't sleep, her mind churning over the upcoming hearing, the threats, the weight of fighting not just for land, but for the right to exist on her own terms. She found Theodore on his porch, watching the stars wheel overhead. Without speaking, she sat beside him, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "Scared?" he asked eventually. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not enough to quit. That's the spirit that'll see you through." He paused, then added, "See us through." Eleanor looked at him, reading the promise in that small word change. "Us. If you'll have me, not as a protector or a solution to Edison, but as a partner, someone who believes in what you're building and wants to help build it. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of coming snow and distant hope. Eleanor considered his words, weighing them against her fierce independence and equally fierce loneliness. Partners, she agreed finally. Equal partners. Theodore smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Wouldn't have it any other way. As dawn approached, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, they prepared for the journey to court. The battle ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together, two souls who'd found each other in the harsh beauty of the frontier, building something neither could create alone. The school bell Eleanor had salvaged from the fire stood ready for morning lessons. Whatever the court decided, she would continue teaching, continue healing, continue proving that strength came in many forms. And Theodore would stand beside her, choosing hope over guilt, future over past. In the vast tapestry of the West, their threads had become intertwined not through force or desperation, but through choice and growing trust. It was, perhaps, the strongest foundation any partnership could have. The courthouse in the county seat stood like a wooden fortress against the morning sky, its weathered boards speaking of justice dispensed and denied in equal measure. Eleanor clutched her leather portfolio containing Benjamin's letters and documents, her knuckles white beneath her worn gloves. Beside her, Theodore sat tall in his saddle, eyes scanning the streets with the vigilance of a man who'd learned to expect trouble. Thomas Edison had arrived early, his black carriage prominent outside the courthouse. Through the window, they could see him conferring with Judge Rockefeller, their heads bent close in conversation that looked far too friendly for Eleanor's comfort. "He's got the judge in his pocket," Harriet Tubman muttered, joining them on the courthouse steps. "But we've got truth on our side. Sometimes that's enough." "And sometimes it isn't," Theodore said grimly. Inside the courtroom, Edison had assembled an impressive array of documents. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Vanderbilt, presented a promissory note allegedly signed by Benjamin Franklin. "As you can see, Your Honor," Vanderbilt intoned. "Mr. Franklin owed my client considerable sums for cattle and supplies. This supposed engagement to Miss Roosevelt appears to be nothing more than an attempt to defraud legitimate creditors." Eleanor stood, her voice clear despite her racing heart. "That signature is forged. Benjamin was left-handed due to a childhood injury. This signature is clearly made by someone right-handed." Judge Rockefeller barely glanced at the document. "Unless you have proof of this alleged injury, Miss Roosevelt, I'm afraid—" "I have proof," a voice called from the back. Mrs. Susan Anthony, the town's elderly schoolteacher, made her way forward. "I taught Benjamin his letters when he first arrived. Had to show him special ways to hold the pen. I've got his old practice sheets if you need to see them." The judge's expression soured, but he allowed the evidence. As Eleanor presented letter after letter, witness after witness, the forge became increasingly apparent. The courtroom stirred with murmurs of discontent, Edison's grip on the town showing cracks. During a recess, Carnegie cornered Eleanor in the hallway. "You're making a mistake, lady. Mr. Edison don't like being embarrassed." Theodore materialized beside them, quiet but present. "Neither does Miss Eleanor. Difference is, she's got cause." That evening, they made camp at Willow Spring, halfway back to Larkspur Flats. The early snow had begun falling, fat flakes that caught the firelight like falling stars. Eleanor sat close to the flames, exhausted from the day's testimony. "The judge will rule against me," she said quietly. "You saw his face?" Theodore added another log to the fire. "Maybe, but you planted seeds of doubt. The whole county saw Edison's tactics today. That matters. Does it when he controls the water, the law, the—" Eleanor's voice caught. "Hey." Theodore moved closer, his presence solid and warm. "You've already won something Edison can't buy. Respect, community. Those children you teach, the families you've helped, they see you for who you are, not who Edison says you are." Eleanor looked at him, firelight dancing in her tired eyes. "When did you become an optimist?" "About 5 minutes after I met a woman willing to threaten to throw her trunk down a well rather than let bullies win." Despite everything, Eleanor smiled. "That seems like a lifetime ago." "Some lifetimes are measured in days, not years." They returned to find Larkspur Flats in uproar. During their absence, Edison's men had diverted the creek completely, leaving the smaller ranches and the town itself without water. The church's well, which had served the community for years, ran dry just as the schoolchildren arrived for their lessons. Eleanor found young Samuel crying, his lips cracked from thirst. "Miss Eleanor, why did the water go away?" She knelt beside him, her heart breaking. "Sometimes people take things that don't belong to them, but we'll fix it, I promise." Theodore surveyed the damage with growing anger. The diversion was clever technically on Edison's land, but affecting everyone downstream. Legal to the letter, criminal in spirit. "We need to act fast," he told the gathered ranchers. "Stock will start dying in days." "What can we do?" George Washington, who ran a small sheep operation, asked desperately. "Edison's got the law." "Then we work outside it," Eleanor said firmly. Everyone turned to stare at the proper Eastern lady who just suggested breaking the law. "Not violence," she clarified quickly. "But there are other ways. What if we dig a new channel, restore the old flow?" "That's Edison's land," someone protested. "At night, in a storm, who's to say where exact boundaries lie?" Eleanor's eyes glinted with determination. "Besides, we're simply restoring God's natural waterway. Surely that's righteous work." Theodore felt a surge of admiration. "You're proposing we outmaneuver Edison." "I'm proposing we survive," Eleanor corrected. "All of us, together." The plan required coordination. While Edison expected legal challenges or violent retaliation, the community organized quietly. The Chinese railroad workers, expert with explosives from tunnel work, calculated exact charges needed. The shepherds scouted alternate routes. The women organized supplies and alibis. The night of the operation, Eleanor insisted on participating. "This is my fight too," she said when Theodore protested. "It's dangerous." "So is dying of thirst. So is letting Edison win." She met his eyes steadily. "Partners, remember—" They worked through the night, a human chain passing rocks and tools. Eleanor labored alongside the others, her hands blistering, her back aching. When young William Chen translated his grandfather's joke about proper ladies don't dig ditches, Eleanor laughed and replied, "Then I guess I'm improper." Just before dawn, with the new channel nearly complete, Carnegie and his men appeared. Well, caught red-handed. Theodore stepped forward, but Eleanor caught his arm. "Let me," she whispered, then raised her voice. "Mr. Carnegie, how fortunate. We've discovered the most remarkable thing in Old Riverbed that predates Mr. Edison's claim. We're simply clearing debris from a natural waterway." "That's bull." "That's archaeology," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "I'm sure Judge Rockefeller will be fascinated by our discovery, especially since the Navajo traders confirmed their people used this water route for generations before any of us arrived." Carnegie hesitated. Shooting trespassers was one thing, but murdering an entire community engaged in archaeological discovery was another. "This ain't over," he snarled, but signaled his men to withdraw. As sunrise painted the mountains gold and rose, water began flowing down the restored channel. The community cheered, embracing each other with joy and relief. Theodore watched Eleanor accept their thanks with grace, saw how naturally she'd become their leader. "You did it," he said when they had a moment alone. "We did it," she corrected. "All of us. But you led them, showed them how to fight without becoming like Edison." Eleanor leaned against him, exhaustion finally showing. I learned from a good teacher, someone who chose to change rather than repeat old patterns. The victory was temporary. They all knew Edison would retaliate. But for now, water flowed, children could drink, and hope lived another day. That afternoon, despite everything, Eleanor held school. The children arrived to find she'd used the blue dye from the Navajo traders to create beautiful banners with their names and achievements. Beauty matters too, she told them. Even here, especially here. During the lesson on the water cycle, young Sarah asked, "Miss Eleanor, will Mr. Edison take our water again?" Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "He might try. But now we know something important. We're stronger together than apart. And sometimes, that's the most powerful force there is." As parents arrived to collect their children, many pressed small gifts into Eleanor's hands: a jar of preserves, a knitted scarf, a carved wooden bird, payment for teaching, but more than that, acceptance, belonging, family. That evening, Theodore found Eleanor at the restored creek, watching the water flow. "Regrets?" he asked. "About what?" "Coming here. You could have stayed in Kansas City, lived a proper life." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "Theodore Roosevelt, do I look like someone who wants a proper life?" He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "No, Miss Eleanor, you look like someone who wants a real life." "Then I'm exactly where I belong." She paused, then added softly, "With exactly who I belong with." The words hung between them, weighted with promise. Theodore reached out, his calloused hand gentle as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Eleanor, A shot rang out, shattering the moment. Carnegie's voice carried across the water. "This is your last warning. Edison wants his water back by sunrise, or things get ugly." Theodore's hand moved to his gun, but Eleanor stopped him. "No, that's what they want, an excuse for violence." She raised her voice. "Tell Mr. Edison the creek flows where God intended. If he has issue with that, he can take it up with the Almighty." After Carnegie left, Theodore turned to Eleanor with newfound respect. "You know this means war." "Then we'd better be ready," Eleanor replied. "But we fight on our terms, not his." As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, they walked back toward town together. The battle for water was won, but the war for justice continued. Edison would escalate, that was certain. But Eleanor had given the community something more valuable than water. She'd given them courage to stand together. "What's our next move?" Theodore asked. Eleanor smiled, a warrior's expression on a teacher's face. "We make this legal, permanent. We find every document, every treaty, every proof that this water belongs to everyone." She looked up at him. "And we protect what we're building here. All of it." Theodore understood she meant more than just water rights. She meant the school, the community, the fragile connections of trust and mutual aid, and perhaps the growing bond between them, partnership deepening into something neither had expected to find in this harsh land. "Together?" he asked. "Together," Eleanor confirmed, and her hand found his as they walked through the sage-scented darkness toward whatever tomorrow would bring. The winter nights grew longer, and with them came Eleanor's doubts. She sat at Theodore's kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and land surveys, fighting a battle with paper and ink that felt increasingly futile. The lamplight flickered across her tired features as she pushed aside another stack of papers. "What if accepting a marriage of convenience would solve everything?" she said quietly, not looking at Theodore. "Edison would back off. The land would be secure." Theodore's coffee cup hit the table harder than necessary. "That what you want?" "Want?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "I wanted a partner who was alive when I arrived. I wanted to build something real with Benjamin. What I want seems to matter very little out here." "It matters to me," Theodore said softly. Eleanor finally met his eyes. "Does it?" Or am I just another cause for you to champion another way to make up for past mistakes? The words stung because they held a grain of truth. Theodore stood, pacing to the frost-covered window. Maybe it started that way, he admitted. But Eleanor, what I feel now— Don't! She held up a hand. Please don't. I can't bear being anyone's redemption story. I've been my father's nurse, Benjamin's mail-order solution, this town's symbol of resistance. When do I get to just be Eleanor? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, wind whistled through the bare cottonwoods, a lonesome sound that matched Eleanor's mood. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Theodore asked finally. Not a cause, not redemption. I see a woman who reads Thoreau to frighten children during dust storms, who learns Navajo medicine to help more people, who stands up to men like Edison not because she has to, but because it's right. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. I'm tired, Theodore, tired of being strong, tired of fighting alone. Then don't, he said simply. Fight with me, not because the law says so or because it's convenient, but because— He struggled for words. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because you see the man I could be, not just the one I was. Eleanor rose, moving to the window beside him. I don't want to lose myself in someone else's life again. I did that with my father. Would have done it with Benjamin. I need to know who I am first. I'm not asking you to lose yourself, Theodore said. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you figure it out. Their conversation was interrupted by hoofbeats in the yard. George Washington burst through the door, face flushed with panic. Miss Eleanor, they took young William Carnegie's got him at Edison's ranch. Eleanor's personal struggles evaporated. William Chen Y. says the boy was stealing complete lie. His grandfather thinks they want to force the Chinese workers to leave, starting with scaring the families. Eleanor was already reaching for her coat. How many men does Edison have there? Maybe a dozen. Miss Eleanor, you can't— Watch me. She turned to Theodore. I need your help. Not as my protector, but as my partner. Can you do that? Theodore nodded, understanding the distinction. What's your plan? Eleanor's mind raced. We can't match them for force, but we don't need to. She turned to George. Gather the women, Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Jefferson, Susan Anthony, anyone who'll come. Tell them to bring lanterns and their children. Children? George asked, confused. Edison's men won't shoot at women and children. We're going to walk right up to his door and demand William back. Eleanor's eyes blazed with determination. And we're going to make sure the whole county sees us do it. Theodore felt a mix of admiration and fear. That's either brilliant or suicidal. Sometimes they're the same thing. Eleanor replied. Within an hour, a remarkable procession formed in the moonlight. Women from every corner of the community, wives of railroad workers, ranchers, shopkeepers walked together, their lanterns creating a river of light. Children held their mothers' hands, some carrying the small flags Eleanor had made for school. Eleanor led them, head high, her teaching bell in one hand. Theodore rode alongside, rifle across his saddle, accompanied by men who served as visible but non-threatening protection. As they approached Edison's ranch, armed men emerged from the shadows. Carnegie stepped forward, disbelief clear on his face. What in the hell? Language, Mr. Carnegie. Eleanor said calmly. There are children present. We've come for William Chen. His mother is worried. That boy's a thief. That boy is 8 years old and one of my students. Eleanor interrupted. Whatever you claim he's done, he deserves to face accusation with his family present, not locked in your barn like a livestock. Edison himself appeared on the porch, still in his black coat despite the late hour. Miss Roosevelt, this is a dangerous game you're playing. This is no game, Mr. Edison. Eleanor's voice carried clear in the cold air. These are mothers wanting their children safe. Surely even you can understand that. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her English halting but clear. My son, please. He only pick up pretty rock near fence. Not stealing, just child being child. The standoff stretched taut. Edison's men looked uncomfortable. Shooting cattle rustlers was one thing, but opening fire on women and children would destroy any legitimacy, Edison claimed. Release the boy, Edison said finally, his voice tight with suppressed rage. But mark my words, Miss Roosevelt. Thank you, Eleanor said simply, cutting off his threat. Mrs. Chen, your son will be out shortly. When William emerged, tear-streaked but unharmed, he ran to his mother. The procession began its journey back, but Eleanor wasn't finished. She turned to address Edison's men directly. Each of you has a choice, she said. Follow a man who imprisons children, or remember what your own mothers taught you about right and wrong. The water flows again. The school stays open, and this community will protect its own, all of them, regardless of where they came from. Several of Edison's hired men shifted uncomfortably. 2 would quit by week's end, unwilling to continue down Edison's path. Back in town, the women dispersed to their homes, but the night's events had forged something new: solidarity that crossed the lines of race, class, and origin. Eleanor had given them a model for resistance that didn't require violence. Theodore found Eleanor at the school, where she was comforting William with cocoa and quiet words. After Mrs. Chen took her son home, Theodore and Eleanor sat alone in the lamplight. You know Edison won't let this stand, Theodore said. I know. Eleanor wrapped her hands around her own cup. But did you see their faces, the women? They realized they have power too. That's what terrifies men like Edison, when people stop believing they're helpless. You could have been killed tonight. But I wasn't. And William's home safe. She looked at him. I meant what I said earlier. I need to know who I am, what I want. But Theodore, I'm starting to think what I want includes you, not as my protector or savior, but as my equal, my partner, my... Your what? He prompted gently. My choice, she finished. If you can be patient while I figure out the rest. Theodore reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Eleanor, I've waited my whole life to find someone who sees me clearly. I can wait a little longer for you to see yourself the same way. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, while outside the wind sang through the cottonwoods. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Edison's retaliation was certain. But tonight, they'd proven something important: community could triumph over intimidation. Courage could take many forms, and 2 damaged souls could choose to heal together rather than apart. Eleanor's journal entry that night was brief but profound. I came west to marry a stranger and find a home. Instead, I found myself a community worth fighting for, and a man who makes me want to be brave enough for love. The first 2 victories are certain. The third requires a different kind of courage. But I'm learning that the best things usually do. Theodore, reading by his own fire, thought about transformation, how the West stripped people down to their essential selves, then offered the chance to rebuild. Eleanor had shown him that strength wasn't about violence or isolation. It was about connection, protection of the vulnerable, choosing hope over fear. Carnegie made one last attempt that week, cornering Eleanor at the general store. Edison's patience is running out. Woman, that land ain't worth dying for. Eleanor set down her purchases carefully before responding. Mr. Carnegie, that land represents every woman who was told she couldn't own property, every immigrant who was denied opportunity, every person who came west believing in second chances. So yes, it's worth fighting for. And if necessary, yes, it's worth dying for. You're a fool. Perhaps, but I'm a fool with a community behind me. Can Edison say the same? The question proved prophetic. As word spread of the night march to save William, more families began questioning Edison's authority. The Chinese workers organized, demanding fair treatment. The shepherds formed an alliance with the cattle ranchers. Even some of Edison's longtime supporters began reconsidering their loyalty. Eleanor and Theodore worked tirelessly to document every legal precedent, every treaty, every scrap of evidence supporting community water rights. Harriet Tubman discovered a surveyor's report from 1876 that showed the creek's original path exactly where the community had restored it. "This could change everything," Harriet said excitedly. "Federal law supersedes Edison's claim." But Eleanor had learned to temper hope with realism. "Only if we can get it before an honest judge, and only if we survive long enough to present it." The transformation in their relationship was subtle but profound. Theodore still protective, but in the way a partner guards another's back in a fight. Eleanor still fiercely independent, but willing to lean on his strength when her own faltered. They were forging something new, not the desperate coupling of frontier survival, but a chosen partnership based on respect, shared values, and growing love. Late one evening, as they worked side by side preparing for the coming legal battle, Theodore asked, "Do you ever regret coming west?" Eleanor considered the question. "I regret Benjamin's death. I regret the pain this has caused good people. But coming here..." She looked around the simple schoolroom they'd built together, at the books donated by townspeople, the children's drawings on the walls. "No, this is where I was meant to be." "And us?" Theodore asked quietly. "Are we meant to be?" Eleanor set down her pen, meeting his eyes fully. "I don't know about meant to be, but I know I choose this. Choose you. Choose us. Not because I need to, but because I want to. Is that enough?" "It's everything," Theodore replied. Outside, snow began falling, blanketing the town in pristine white, but underneath the water still flowed. The community still stood united, and two hearts continued their careful dance toward a future neither had expected, but both were choosing, one day at a time. The War Council convened in the church on a bitter February morning, breath misting in the cold air as ranchers, farmers, and townspeople gathered around Eleanor's carefully drawn maps. The restoration of the water had bought them time, but everyone knew Edison would strike back harder. "We need a three-pronged approach," Eleanor explained, her schoolteacher's clarity serving her well. "Legal, practical, and communal. We can't win fighting on just one front." Harriet Tubman nodded, adjusting her spectacles. "I'll file the federal claim based on the 1876 survey, but we need to get it before Judge Marshall in the Capitol, not Rockefeller here." "That's 2 days' ride in good weather," George Washington observed. "Longer if Edison's men try to stop us." "Then we make sure they don't." Theodore said, "I'll organize rotating patrols on the roads. We travel in groups, never alone." Samuel Morse, the telegraph operator, raised his hand. "I can send word ahead to friendly stations, create a network so we know if trouble's coming." Eleanor smiled at the cooperation. "Good. For the practical side, we need to ensure water access remains open. I propose we establish a formal water-sharing agreement, documented and witnessed." "A water cooperative?" asked Margaret Fuller, who ran a small farm with her husband. "Would Edison's men respect paper?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "But the federal marshals would, if it comes to that. We make ourselves legally unassailable." Young William Chen translated for his grandfather, who'd become an unofficial leader among the Chinese workers. The old man spoke at length, gestures emphatic. "Grandfather says the railroad workers will help," William reported. "They know the mountain passes, can scout Edison's movements, but they want promises to fair treatment when this is over." "They'll have it," Eleanor said firmly. "We all rise together, or we don't rise at all." The meeting concluded with assignments, each family committed to contributing whether through patrols, supplies, or spreading word to allies in neighboring towns. What had begun as Eleanor's fight had become everyone's cause. That night, as she and Theodore prepared legal documents by lamplight, he asked, "You really think we can win this peacefully?" "I think we have to try," Eleanor replied. Violence would give Edison exactly what he wants, an excuse to bring in hired guns, maybe even the army. But if we're legally right, morally united, she shrugged. David had a sling. We have the law. David also had faith, Theodore pointed out. Then it's fortunate I'm developing some, Eleanor said with a wry smile. The prairie fire started 3 nights later. Eleanor woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of the church bell ringing frantically. She rushed outside to see the horizon glowing orange, a wall of flame racing across the grasslands toward town. "Edison's doing," Theodore said grimly, already organizing bucket brigades. "Wind's perfect to drive it right through Main Street." Eleanor didn't waste time on anger. "The school, we need to save the books, the children's work." "No time." Theodore grabbed her arm. "We fight the fire, or we lose everything." The town mobilized with desperate efficiency. Men, women, and children formed human chains, passing buckets, soaking blankets, beating at the advancing flames with wet burlap. The Chinese workers appeared with shovels, rapidly digging fire breaks. The Navajo traders who'd camped nearby rode in to help, their knowledge of prairie fires invaluable. Eleanor worked beside them all, her dress smoldering from flying embers, her hands blistering from the rough bucket handles. When young Sarah froze in terror, Eleanor pulled her close. "Remember what we learned about fire? It needs fuel. We deny it fuel. We win." Through the smoke and chaos, she glimpsed Carnegie and his men at the oil storage, clearly preparing to flee after setting the blaze. Rage flared in her chest, but she pushed it down. Save the town first, justice later. Theodore organized teams to wet down rooftops, while others fought the advancing fire line. The battle raged for hours. Humans against nature's fury, weaponized by greed. When Margaret Fuller collapsed from smoke inhalation, Eleanor dragged her to safety, using her medical training to clear the woman's airways. Just when it seemed the fire would overwhelm them, the wind shifted. The flames turned back on themselves, finding only burned ground. Exhausted cheers rose from smoke-blackened faces as the danger passed. Dawn revealed the damage: several outlying buildings lost, fields destroyed, but the town itself saved. Also revealed Edison and Carnegie, caught red-handed at the oil depot with the evidence of their arson. Deputy Lincoln, who'd always feared Edison, stood straighter than Eleanor had ever seen him. "Thomas Edison, Andrew Carnegie, you're under arrest for arson and attempted murder." Edison's composure finally cracked. "You can't arrest me, I own this town." "No," Eleanor said, stepping forward through the crowd. Her dress was ruined, her face streaked with soot, but her dignity was unassailable. "You own property. We are the town, and we reject your ownership of us." The impromptu trial convened that afternoon, the circuit judge having arrived for his monthly visit. Eleanor stood before the assembly, voice hoarse from smoke but clear with conviction. "Your Honor, we present evidence of systematic intimidation, water theft, false documents, imprisonment of a child, and now arson, but more than crimes against law. These are crimes against community itself." She presented each piece of evidence methodically, the forged signatures, witness testimonies, the 1876 survey proving water rights. The townspeople watched in awe as their schoolteacher transformed into an advocate for justice. Theodore testified about Edison's history of violence, his own voice steady as he admitted, "I once thought might made right. This woman, this community taught me otherwise. We choose law over lawlessness, even when it's harder." When Edison's lawyer tried to discredit the Chinese witnesses, Eleanor stood firm. "Every person here is part of this community. Their testimony carries equal weight, as the Constitution demands." Young William translated his grandfather's evidence about seeing Carnegie purchase the oil used in the arson. Mrs. Chen testified about her son's false imprisonment. Even some of Edison's former men came forward, conscience finally outweighing fear. The judge, an older man named Sherman, who'd seen his share of frontier justice, deliberated briefly. Mr. Edison, the evidence against you is overwhelming. You're remanded to federal custody to await trial. As for the water rights, the 1876 survey clearly establishes community access. Any interference will be met with federal intervention. Edison's empire crumbled in minutes. As marshals led him away, he snarled at Eleanor. "You've destroyed everything I built." "No," Eleanor replied calmly. "We've built something better." The celebration that night was subdued exhaustion and the nearness of catastrophe tempering joy. But as Eleanor moved through the crowd, she felt the profound shift in the community. Former strangers embraced, united by shared struggle and victory. Theodore found her at the rebuilt water channel, washing soot from her face in the clear stream. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected, then smiled. "I'm starting to sound repetitive about that." "Community effort," he agreed. "But you led us, showed us how to fight with wisdom instead of weapons." Eleanor studied him in the fading light. "You've changed too. The man who met me at the train station would have solved this with gunplay. That man was alone." Theodore said simply, "This one has something worth protecting differently." "Oh, what's that?" Instead of answering directly, Theodore pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "Found this in the ashes of the school. Thought you'd want it." Eleanor unwrapped it carefully, the bell she'd used to call students to class, warped by heat, but intact. Her eyes filled with tears. "The children will be so happy. We can rebuild." "Eleanor," Theodore's voice stopped her. "Before we rebuild anything else, I need to say something. These past months, watching you transform this town, seeing your courage, not the flashy kind, but the steady, daily kind that really changes things, I've fallen in love with you. Not because you need me, but because you don't. Because you choose to let me stand beside you anyway." Eleanor set down the bell carefully, her heart racing. "Theodore, I'm not asking for an answer now," he continued. "But when you're ready, when you know what you want, I'll be here, building alongside you. Whatever you choose to build." Eleanor reached up, touching the scar on his shoulder through his shirt. "I know what I want," she said quietly. "I've known for weeks. I was just afraid that wanting it meant giving up who I've become. And now I know better. Love doesn't diminish us. It multiplies us." She met his eyes fully. "I love you, Theodore Roosevelt, not as my protector or savior, but as my partner, my equal, my choice." Theodore pulled her close, and they stood together by the water they'd fought to free, while stars began appearing in the smoke-tinged sky. Around them, the community continued its quiet celebration, families reunited, neighbors helping neighbors, the bonds of shared struggle transforming into lasting connections. "So what's next?" Theodore asked eventually. Eleanor smiled, already planning. "We rebuild the school, establish the water cooperative formally, create legal protections for all residents regardless of origin." She paused. "And maybe we make that partnership of ours official, if you're asking." "I'm asking," Theodore confirmed, "but on your terms, in your time. My terms include keeping the school running, continuing my medical practice, and having a full say in all decisions affecting our land and community." "Wouldn't have it any other way." As they walked back toward town, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd arrived as a stranger seeking a predetermined life, only to forge her own path through courage, compassion, and community. The West had tested her, scarred her, but ultimately revealed her true strength not in standing alone, but in standing with others. The telegraph office was already buzzing with news of Edison's arrest. Word would spread quickly a woman had faced down a cattle baron and won. Not through violence, but through justice. Not alone, but with her community. It was, Eleanor thought, a very American story, immigrants and natives, workers and ranchers, men and women, united by shared values rather than divided by differences. And, at its heart, a love story not just between two people, but between individuals and the community they chose to build together. The spring thaw brought more than melting snow to Larkspur Flats. It brought the community's attempts at reconciliation. Eleanor stood in her rebuilt schoolroom, watching as Mrs. Whitman approached with a bundle of fabric. "For the children," the boarding house owner said stiffly, unable to meet Eleanor's eyes. "Thought you might make them new curtains, the old ones." She gestured helplessly at the fire damage still visible on some walls. Eleanor accepted the gift gracefully. "The children will love bright curtains. Thank you, Mrs. Whitman." The older woman lingered, clearly struggling. "Finally," she burst out. "I was wrong. About you, about all of it. When you first came, I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. You've proven yourself 10 times over." "We all had to learn," Eleanor said gently. "What matters is we move forward together." Similar scenes played out across town. Men who'd worked for Edison came seeking honest employment. Eleanor and Theodore hired several for the growing operation at what was now officially called Cottonwood Station. Theodore had thrown himself into the construction with characteristic intensity. "If we're going to run a way station," he told Eleanor, "we'll run the best one on the line." The building rose from Benjamin Franklin's original foundation, expanded to include a common room for travelers, clean sleeping quarters, and Eleanor's particular pride, a proper schoolroom that could serve the growing community. "You know," Theodore said one evening as they reviewed plans, "most way stations don't include educational facilities." Eleanor smiled. "Most way stations aren't run by a teacher. Besides, travelers have children too. Why shouldn't they learn while their parents rest?" The Chinese workers, led by William's grandfather, contributed skilled carpentry. The design incorporated elements they suggested: better ventilation, clever storage solutions. When some townspeople grumbled about foreign notions, Eleanor publicly praised the innovations. Good ideas have no nationality. She declared at a town meeting, "We're building something new here. Let's build it with the best of all our traditions." One morning, Eleanor found young Sarah crying behind the school. The girl clutched a torn primer, one of the few books salvaged from the fire. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Eleanor knelt beside her. "Mary Chen says her family might leave," Sarah sobbed. "Her papa thinks even with Mr. Edison gone, they're not really welcome. I don't want her to go. She's teaching me to count in Chinese." Eleanor's heart ached. Despite their united stand against Edison, deeper prejudices remained. "Let me talk to Mr. Chen," she promised. The conversation with the Chen family revealed fears shared by many immigrant workers. Yes, they'd stood together in crisis, but what about daily life? Would their children truly be accepted? Would they have fair chances at prosperity? Eleanor brought the concern to Theodore. "We need to do more than just say everyone's welcome. We need to prove it." Together, they developed a radical proposal: formal partnership agreements with any family willing to help run Cottonwood Station. The Chinese families would manage the laundry and cooking services. The Irish workers would handle livestock. Everyone would share in the profits proportionally. "It's unprecedented," Harriet Tubman warned. "You'll face resistance." "Then we'll face it," Eleanor said firmly. "But we do this right, or everything we fought for means nothing." The community meeting to discuss the proposal grew heated. Some ranchers protested sharing profits with foreigners. Others worried about setting precedents that might upset the social order. Eleanor stood before them, calm but determined. The social order we're upset already favored men like Edison. Is that really what we want to preserve? She looked around the room. Every person here contributed to our victory. The Chen family fought the fire alongside us. The O'Brien brothers risked their lives on patrol. Are we really going to say their children deserve less opportunity than ours? Theodore added his voice. I've hired men based on their skin color and birthplace before. Hired others to do violence because they looked like me. Both times. I chose wrong. Now I'm choosing to hire based on character and contribution. That's the Western way, judging people by their actions, not their origins. Old Samuel Clemens, the town's banker who'd survived by staying neutral during Edison's reign, surprised everyone by standing. The boy's right. Money doesn't care what language you speak. If these folks help make Cottonwood Station profitable, they deserve their share. The vote passed narrowly, but it passed. Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They weren't just rebuilding structures, they were rebuilding society itself. The work progressed rapidly. Theodore often found Eleanor teaching impromptu lessons to anyone who'd listen. She taught English to immigrant mothers while their children played. She showed ranch hands basic arithmetic for managing accounts. Education, she believed, was the great equalizer. One evening, a familiar figure appeared at the station Carnegie, fresh from jail and looking considerably humbled. Eleanor tensed, but Theodore placed a calming hand on her arm. I ain't here for trouble, Carnegie said quickly. Just wanted to say something. He removed his hat, crushing it between his hands. I done wrong, following Edison, threatening folks, that fire. He swallowed hard. My ma would have been ashamed. She didn't raise me for that. What do you want, Carnegie? Theodore asked evenly. Work, if you'll have me. Honest work. I'm good with horses. Can read and write some. I got no right to ask, but... He looked directly at Eleanor. You showed mercy to others. Thought maybe... Eleanor studied him for a long moment. The man who'd threatened her, burned the barn, terrorized children. Everything in her wanted to refuse. But she thought of her own words about redemption, about choosing to be better. 3-month trial. She said finally, you work under Mr. O'Brien's supervision. Any trouble, any hint of your old ways, and you're gone. And Carnegie, you'll take classes with the children. A man who can read and write some needs to read and write well. Carnegie's eyes widened. You want me in school with kids? Education is for everyone, Eleanor said firmly. That's non-negotiable. To everyone's surprise, Carnegie proved a dedicated worker and earnest, if embarrassed, student. Sitting beside 8-year-olds practicing letters humbled him more effectively than any punishment could have. Spring bloomed into summer, and Cottonwood Station became a beacon on the frontier. Travelers spoke of it as far as Denver, not just for the clean beds and good food, but for the unusual harmony among its diverse staff. Eleanor's school drew students from miles around, some boarding during the week to attend. Theodore found her one evening in what they'd come to call their spot by the creek, updating her journal. Regrets, he asked, echoing his question from months ago. Eleanor looked up, smiling. About which part? The successful business, the thriving school, the community that actually feels like home. She closed the journal. Or are you asking about us? Maybe I am, Theodore admitted. We've been so focused on building everything else. We've been building us too, Eleanor said softly. Every decision we make together, every challenge we face, we're creating our own foundation. She reached for his hand. But if you're asking if I'm ready for the next step, yeah, I am. Theodore's face lit up. Eleanor Roosevelt, are you proposing to me? Would that scandalize you? She teased. A woman taking initiative. Nothing you do scandalizes me anymore, he replied. It just makes me love you more. They sat together as the sun set, planning a future that would have seemed impossible when Eleanor stepped off that train. The woman who'd been the bride nobody claimed had claimed herself, her community, and her right to love on her own terms. We'll marry here, Eleanor decided. At the station, with everyone present. Not because we need their permission, but because they're part of our story. Even Carnegie? Theodore asked with a grin. Even Carnegie. Redemption includes wedding invitations, apparently. As stars emerged overhead, Eleanor reflected on the journey. She'd sought a simple life as a frontier wife and found instead a complex calling as teacher, healer, and community leader. She'd expected to lose herself in marriage and discovered instead a partnership that enhanced rather than diminished her. "You know what the best part is?" she asked Theodore. "What's that?" "We're just beginning. The station, the school, us. It's all just the foundation for whatever comes next." Theodore pulled her close. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Together. Eleanor agreed, and the word carried all the weight of promises made and kept, of individual strength multiplied by unity, of love chosen freely and fiercely in a land that tested everything but rewarded courage with possibility. The creek gurgled beside them, flowing freely as it had for centuries, witness to all the human dramas along its banks. But this drama, this story of transformation and triumph, felt different. It spoke not of conquest, but of cooperation, not of domination, but of mutual elevation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be difficult students, upset travelers, weather disasters, and the ongoing work of building true equality. But tonight, Eleanor and Theodore sat together by the water they'd fought to keep free, planning a wedding that would celebrate not just their union, but the community they'd helped forge. In her journal that night, Eleanor wrote, "I am no longer the bride nobody claimed. I am the woman who claimed herself, who found love by choosing it, who discovered that the greatest adventure isn't crossing the frontier, it's crossing the boundaries within ourselves that keep us from becoming who we're meant to be." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline sky that made the Wyoming mountains seem close enough to touch. Eleanor stood before the mirror in the room that had once been Benjamin Franklin's, wearing not the elaborate wedding dress she'd carried west, but a simple gown she'd sewn herself cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, practical yet beautiful. Mary Chen and Sarah braided wildflowers into Eleanor's hair, their young fingers gentle and sure. "You look like a prairie princess," Sarah declared. "Better," Mary added shyly. "You look like Miss Eleanor, but happier." Outside, the entire community transformed Cottonwood Station into a celebration of unity. The Navajo traders had returned specifically for the occasion, bringing woven blankets as gifts. The Chinese families prepared traditional dishes alongside American fare. Irish fiddlers tuned their instruments while Mexican vaqueros who joined the community strung papel picado between the buildings. Theodore stood near the creek in his best jacket, the one Eleanor had carefully mended after their firefight. Carnegie, of all people, stood as one of his groomsmen, still looking slightly bewildered by the honor. "I never thought I'd see this day," Carnegie muttered, adjusting his borrowed tie. "Which part?" Theodore asked. "Me getting married, or you standing up for me?" "Both," Carnegie admitted. "That woman changed everything, changed me. Still can't believe she gave me a chance after everything." "Eleanor believes in redemption," Theodore said simply. "She taught me to believe in it too." The ceremony took place where the old creek bed met the restored channel, a physical reminder of what they'd accomplished together. Reverend Washington, who'd offered Eleanor shelter that first night, performed the service with tears in his eyes. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "We gathered today to witness something remarkable, not just the union of two souls, but the culmination of a community's journey from division to unity, from fear to hope." Eleanor walked down the makeshift aisle, alone her choice, symbolizing that she came to this marriage freely, not as property transferred between men. The crowd parted before her ranchers and railroad workers, Shopkeepers and shepherds, children she'd taught and adults she'd healed. Each face told a story of transformation. When she reached Theodore, he whispered, "You sure about this?" "Never more sure of anything in my life," she whispered back. The vows they'd written themselves spoke not of ownership, but of partnership. Eleanor promised to stand beside you in drought and plenty, in conflict and peace, building always toward justice and compassion. Theodore vowed to honor your independence while cherishing our interdependence, to support your dreams as fiercely as my own. When Reverend Washington asked if anyone objected, old Samuel Clemens stood up. The crowd held its breath until he said, "Only objection I have is that it took these two so long to figure out what the rest of us could see plain as day. Carry on." Laughter rippled through the gathering as the ceremony continued. The ring Theodore slipped onto Eleanor's finger had been crafted by the local blacksmith from gold the Chinese miners had contributed a community effort for a community celebration. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," Reverend Washington declared, "I pronounce you husband and wife, partners in all things, equal in the eyes of God and law." As Theodore leaned in to kiss his bride, he whispered the words that had started their journey, "You're mine." But now Eleanor whispered back, "And you're mine, by choice, in freedom, forever." The celebration erupted with joy. Fiddles sang out frontier melodies while children raced between the dancers. Tables groaned under the weight of communal feast, Chinese dumplings next to Irish stew, Mexican tamales alongside American cornbread. It was America itself on those tables, diverse and harmonious. As the afternoon sun began its descent, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, the sky suddenly darkened. Clouds rolled in from nowhere, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. "Rain on a wedding day," someone called out. "Bad luck." But Eleanor laughed, spreading her arms wide as the shower intensified. "Rain on a wedding in Wyoming? That's not bad luck, that's a miracle." The celebration moved under cover, but the joy only intensified. Children splashed in puddles while adults huddled under the station's wide eaves. The rain passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the air fresh and sweet with the scent of sage. As evening approached, Eleanor stood before the assembled crowd. "When I arrived in Larkspur Flats, I was the bride nobody claimed. Today, I want to thank this community for claiming me, for teaching me that home isn't just about land or buildings. It's about the people who stand together in hard times and celebrate together in good ones." She looked around at the faces Mrs. Chen, whose son William now read at a 6th grade level, Carnegie, who'd just passed his own literacy test, the Navajo grandmother who'd taught her traditional medicine, Harriet Tubman, who'd fought the legal battles, all the souls who'd chosen community over division. "We've built something precious here," Eleanor continued. "Not just a way station or a school, but proof that people from all backgrounds can work together, learn together, thrive together. May Cottonwood Station always be a place where travelers find rest, where children find education, and where anyone seeking a second chance finds hope." The crowd erupted in cheers. Theodore joined his wife, taking her hand as they faced their community, their family of choice. Years later, that wedding would be remembered as a turning point. The railroad company, impressed by Cottonwood Station's success, established it as an official stop. Eleanor's school grew into a proper academy, drawing students from 3 territories. The water cooperative became a model for other communities facing similar challenges. Theodore established the Cottonwood Community Fund, using profits from the station to help new families get established. "Everyone deserves the chance we got," he'd say, remembering his own second chance at becoming a better man. Eleanor never stopped teaching. Even as responsibilities grew, she maintained her afternoon classes. Children who'd learned their letters on her lap grew up to become teachers, doctors, and leaders themselves. William Chen went on to become the first Chinese-American judge in Wyoming, crediting Miss Eleanor for showing him that words could be as powerful as any weapon. Carnegie reformed completely, became the station's most trusted employee, and eventually a part owner. He married the school teacher from the neighboring town and named his daughter Eleanor, after the woman who showed me mercy when I deserved none. The couple's own children grew up in a community where diversity was strength, where education was prized above pedigree, and where water flowed freely for all who thirsted. They learned their letters alongside children of every background, understanding from birth that America's promise belonged to everyone willing to work for it. On their 10th anniversary, Eleanor and Theodore stood once again by the creek, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The station bustled behind them, travelers resting, children learning, families building lives together. "Any regrets?" Theodore asked, echoing their old tradition. Eleanor smiled, her hair now touched with silver, but her eyes still bright with purpose. "Only one," she said. He looked at her in surprise until she continued, "that there's only one lifetime to live this life with you." As stars emerged in the vast western sky, they could hear the evening sounds of their community laughter from the common room, a baby crying in the family quarters, someone practicing scales on the piano donated by a grateful traveler. It was the sound of civilization not imposed but grown organically from the harsh soil of the frontier. Eleanor pulled out her old journal, now one of many volumes documenting their journey. In it, she wrote, "I came west as a bride nobody claimed. Tonight, I am a woman who has claimed her place in the world not through conquest, but through compassion, not through isolation, but through community. The West tested us, scarred us, but ultimately revealed a truth: we are strongest not when we stand alone, but when we stand together." She closed the journal and leaned against Theodore, watching the first stars appear. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle announced new arrivals, new stories beginning. Cottonwood Station stood ready to welcome them, a beacon of hope in the vast darkness, proof that even in the harshest lands, love and justice could take root and flourish. The West had made them, but more importantly, they had remade the West one student, one family, one act of courage at a time. And their story, like the creek that flowed freely past their door, would run on through generations, inspiring others to choose hope over fear, community over division, and love over all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and community in the American West. I hope Eleanor and Theodore's journey touched your heart as it did mine. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please leave a comment below sharing your location so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of the frontier. Hit that like button, and don't forget to click the hype button to help this story reach more listeners around the world. Your support means everything, and it helps keep these stories of the Old West alive. Until next time, partners.